Right there in the middle of the gate with passengers lined up and watching, Harriet Stone tore Caleb's first-class boarding pass clean in half. No hesitation, no explanation, just a sharp rip, and then those 4 words that landed like a slap. "You don't belong here." Her voice was cold, cold like Nebraska mornings before the sun even dares to rise, and she wasn't shouting. No, worse than that. She said it flat, calm, like she was stating an objective truth, like she was the final word on who deserves dignity. There stood Caleb Thornhill, 13 years old, wearing a faded hoodie and sneakers too clean to be expensive. And yet, there was something unshakable in the way he stood. Something built from a life of hearing no and choosing to rise anyway. The entire gate froze. The air, thick with anticipation, seemed to tighten around us. It was the kind of silence that makes people forget how to blink. Even the sunbeams cutting through the wide glass windows at Denver International couldn't soften what had just happened. Now maybe you're thinking, someone must have spoken up, right? Surely some adult stepped in, but no, nobody moved. A businessman in a suit gripped his coffee so hard the cup bent. A woman in pearls fumbled her phone. The flight attendant at the jet bridge stood motionless, eyes wide like she'd seen a ghost. And in the center of it all was Caleb, small in size but impossibly steady, his hands deep in his pockets, his ticket in tatters, his eyes locked on Harriet like he was memorizing every second of this moment. You could almost hear his grandfather's voice whispering in his mind. "Stand tall, speak truth, never let them see you shake." And Caleb wasn't just another passenger. He wasn't just a kid flying alone. He was Caleb Thornhill, grandson of Governor George Thornhill, Nebraska through and through. His grandfather had sent him on this flight first class to Washington, D.C. for a national youth forum. Not as a favor, not with some political pull, but because he'd earned it, because he had a presentation to finish, and because he represented something bigger than himself. The seat had been paid for in full. But Harriet? She saw something else. Maybe it was the hoodie. Maybe it was his age, maybe it was his skin. Or maybe it was just her own smallness looking for someone smaller. Whatever it was, she decided he didn't fit her idea of first class. She stepped forward, lifted her chin, and said, "Step aside. This cabin isn't for children." Her words were sharp, surgical, meant to cut. Caleb didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He simply said, "I have a valid first-class seat." That was when something shifted. A businessman nearby finally spoke, voice breaking slightly. "That boy paid for his seat. There must be a mistake." Harriet refused to back down. "It's against airline protocol. Minors can't travel alone in first class," she insisted, clinging to rules no one had ever seen enforced like this. Caleb stayed calm. "I'm traveling for a state program," he explained. "My grandfather booked this seat so I could work on my presentation." Around them, phones began to rise, screens lighting up, cameras rolling. These days, injustice doesn't get to hide. Harriet's jaw clenched. "This is not a negotiation. Move along, please." Some passengers stepped back, afraid to get involved. But others stood firm. Caleb didn't move. Instead, he unlocked his phone, opened the ClearFly security app, and called the one man who had prepared him for moments exactly like this. On speaker, his voice steady. "Grandpa, I need code 77. And then, for exactly 47 seconds, time seemed to freeze. Then alarms began to go off. Not just at that gate. Across 3 airlines. Across 3 cities. Denver, Chicago, Atlanta. A full ethics verification had been triggered. Protocols activated. Flights were held. Terminals paused. Somewhere behind the scenes, servers hummed as the network responded not to a tantrum, but to a verified override code only a sitting governor could issue. Harriet's face turned gray. The 2 security guards at the gate, big men in crisp uniforms, stopped in their tracks, suddenly unsure who was in charge. Caleb? He didn't smirk, didn't puff his chest. He just stood there like the sky had cleared, and he could see straight through to D.C. The crowd parted, hesitant, but awestruck. Harriet had to step aside. Caleb walked forward, not triumphant, not smug, just quietly determined, each step echoing what his grandfather had taught him. Sometimes power means staying grounded when the world is desperate to push you out. Carlos, the young flight attendant, gave him a nod as he passed, One of those small gestures that says, I saw that. I won't forget it. Caleb sat down, pulled out his tablet, and opened his slides. The plane took off late, the captain's voice unsteady, passengers murmuring. But the air had changed. There was something different now. A buzz, not of gossip, but of reckoning. Some passengers stared. Others looked away, but no one forgot. Caleb didn't act like someone who had pulled off a coup. He acted like someone who knew the weight of it. He'd grown up in Lincoln, long afternoons at the Capitol, with his grandfather talking through legislation, walking the marble floors where laws were born. His mom had passed when he was 9. His dad was deployed overseas. It had been just him and the governor for years, debating policy over strong coffee and toast gone cold. So when the invitation to the National Youth Forum came, it was more than just another line on a resume. It was purpose, the patents he'd filed, the farming app he was coding, the late nights spent thinking about how to fix things most people ignored. All of that had led to this seat, and today, he had earned it all over again. Most of the adults tried to pretend nothing had happened. They knew. Everyone knew. His phone buzzed. The National Passenger Trust Index had gone blue, cleared, verified, trusted. That card his grandfather gave him wasn't just a pass. It was a responsibility, a reminder. You see injustice, you act. This wasn't about payback. It was about principle. When Carlos checked on him, Caleb just said, I'm fine. Thanks, that was enough. The cabin gradually returned to its routine, but not really. A quiet had settled in, a sort of respect that didn't need words. 2 rows ahead, a Navy-suited executive was discreetly recording the moment. Airline staff scrambled behind the scenes, knowing policy updates were coming. But for now, the flight continued. Caleb leaned back in his seat, closed his eyes, and let the adrenaline ease out of his chest. He'd done what he was raised to do, but deep down, he knew. This was just the beginning. As the last passengers left the plane, headlines exploded. Teen triggers 1.7B ethics review. Social media lit up with footage of Harriet Stone ripping Caleb Thornhill's first-class ticket. Hashtags like #Thornhill effect trended worldwide. Harriet wasn't sent to a break room. She faced a full panel of executives in a glass conference room, forced to watch herself deny a kid dignity. Heart rate data. Policy violations. No apology could undo what the world had seen. Meanwhile, Caleb stood beside his grandfather at a press conference. When asked if he knew what would happen, he simply said, I stood still, and the world understood. The FAA launched the Thornhill Charter, new rules to protect minors, enforce airline accountability, and eliminate bias in boarding. Airlines rushed to retrain staff, update systems, and offer reparations. Caleb spoke before Congress in his oversized blazer. Sometimes standing still is louder than screaming, he said. Flight crews began wearing ethics over entitlement pins. Airports displayed passenger rights. Change was happening, not just in policy, but in culture. Months later, Caleb flew again. He was welcomed by the airline's new chief flight attendant, Diana Wilson, the first black woman in the role. Past critics apologized. Industry leaders nodded with respect. In the cockpit, pilots showed Caleb the new ethics system. Your stories required reading now, they said. As the plane rose, golden light filled the cabin. Caleb leaned back, calm and quiet. He was only 13, but his silence had echoed farther than any shout, because real justice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just stands its ground.